now like to call upon Ramkumar, a senior partner, to give us an insightful presentation on digital banking. Ram.
Thank you, Amit. That was Amit Jain for us, co-head of IBS Intelligence, giving us the welcome note. Thank you again, Amit. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. It's a real competition between the chef at Shangri-La and the guys who are going to be on the stage here. So I could see that the first over, it's a 2020 IPL season. I could see that the first over has gone to the chef. The good afternoon was not so strong. Let me try again. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. So what we have today is, a discussion more than actually a presentation, where we are seeking to actually have some very engaging, very involved conversation and exchange of thoughts and ideas amongst people who are both practitioners and service providers in the space of digital banking and artificial intelligence. And that's really the theme for the summit here today. My name is Ram. I am a senior partner with Cedar and with IBS Intelligence, and I've been in the industry for close to 28 years. Obviously, it's always fascinating to be amongst many of the friends who are in the room here, whom I've had the benefit of knowing over the years. And if I may actually jump straight into a presentation that I have here. Is that the full size, Ojas? Yeah? All right. So we have a small presentation that I wanted to make today to actually talk about what we are seeing in the digital banking space. And we'll also talk about a little more about what we see as the bank, building a bank of the future. We have people here who I'll introduce later who actually are doing a startup when they are 100 and keep the suspense on. I'll talk more about it later. But let me jump into this presentation today. So what we are seeing here is that we have when it comes to digital banking, we have about $1 trillion plus transactions on digital payments that we have seen in UPI just last year, FY23. So if there is a place where digital banking has to be spoken about and digital payments being the heart and engine of it, it's India. And I think it's interesting to be having this conversation here today, right? Globally, we have about 3.6 billion digital banking users. Let that number register in, folks. That's like half the world's population, right? I mean, it's 3.6 billion digital banking users globally. And if I was to just jump straight into what's happening and my apologies for the small font there, I mean, this is not a full screen there, but I'll just take you through the important stats there, right? From an Indian context, we have close to about 700 million internet users in the country, right? I mean, it tells you the size of the scale in which we're operating, which clearly means also that if it works in India, then it definitely works for the world. And I know that we do have a lot of people here who actually run very large global capability centers and would agree with me that if you could get this work in India, then you're really working for the world, right? And we do see a lot happening on the digital space, on the payment space, and that's the next wave that you're seeing around. And the theme that we'll also talk a lot today will be on AI, right? So if I was to pick, and this is not necessarily exhaustive, but if I was to pick, let's say, 6 broad themes that one would think are appropriate or relevant in the context of what we are seeing around the world on digital banking and AI, those are the 6 that I would pick, right? The first, obviously, is we do see digital banking, digital banks, and digital banking, and there is obviously an overlap on those 2 phrases there. We'll talk about that also. One area that I have actually been having a lot of conversations with banks around the world and in India is banking as a service. Clearly, that's an area that we are seeing emerging increasingly as a concept that is as important. We'll also talk about banking as a platform, and there's obviously a difference there. The third piece is on open banking, open finance, again, an area which is very closely linked to what we are seeing in banking as a service, but obviously having its own variants there. AI in banking in various use cases, we'll talk about that. Clearly, if I was to pick themes that are actually of the ecosystem, beyond just what the subject areas are. One clearly is about how the bank fintech cooperation or collaboration is actually emerging. Few years back, and some of my colleagues would remember when I used to stand in a podium like this, the conversation was more about are banks and fintechs supposed to be competing or collaborating? I think we've come a long way from that point to where we are now. I think clearly it's about how do we collaborate than about whether to collaborate. And the last piece, I do want to touch briefly about what GCCs have actually been having, to play, especially, given that we're having this interesting conversation in Bangalore. I was reading in the papers yesterday that 33% of the real estate, corporate real estate in Bangalore is actually owned by GCCs, which is an interesting number. It used to be 25%, like 3 years back. It's gone up to 33. Tells you volumes about both the impact and the scale in which this is operating. So those are 6 themes, and I'm going to touch very briefly about each one of them. The idea is to not elaborate, but I'll be happy to take any questions along the way as well. The first is actually on digital banking, right? Now, if you were to look at the principles of digital banking as it is emerging now, the first one most important principle, or should I say paradigm shift as they call it, is in thinking digital first, right? I mean, there is a huge difference between doing things the way they used to be and then trying to actually be translating them or getting them to be digitized to actually doing things digital first. I think that's clearly the fundamental shift that one is experiencing. Honestly, I think our generation may be one of the most luckiest to have experienced what it was to be paper first to what it is now as digital first, honestly, right? We do see the most important aspect about digital is actually about self-onboarding. I was talking to a very senior banker in the room here a little while ago at lunch, and Pankaj was explaining how things have actually shifted from just servicing digital to actually what is actually onboarding and getting people on board. And that therefore there's a huge shift that you're seeing on how the single most important measure of the efficacy of digital banking is actually the quality of digital self-onboarding, right? The DIY is what we see is most important aspect here. The banking as a partner, and you also see platform as a service. I think 2 interesting themes. Banking as a partner, baap hai. So we need to talk about, we have baap pass ho gaya udhar. But essentially, if I was to just decode this the way we look at banking as a service and banking as a platform, which is the BaaS. And is there any volunteer to actually give me an answer? What is the difference between BaaS and BaaS and BaaP? Simple definition. Okay, so here it is, right? I mean, honestly, that silence tells me a lot about the discomfort that many of us have when we talk about these terms, and it becomes very awkward if you don't know these, and your children would know more about this, so we should actually talk about it. When 2 entities, a bank and a non-bank, get to collaborate, right, you actually have either a BaaS happening or a BaaP happening, right? When a bank is delivering its products and services through that partner to its customer, it's banking as a service. As simple as that, right? So if, let's say, you are a bank and you have partnered with, let's say, Reliance Digital, and the customer who's using a Reliance Digital app is getting to experience your banking product and services through that app, then what you're offering is banking as a service to that customer. Now, if you as a bank are getting to offer the products of Reliance Digital, if you're actually offering cinema ticket booking and railway ticket booking and flight booking on your platform, then you're offering your platform to other partners, so that's banking as a platform. It's 2 sides of the same coin. When you obviously are offering your services through other platforms, through other partners, that's banking as a service. And when you're actually getting to deliver your others' products through your platform, it's banking as a platform. When I'm saying you, I'm referring to the bankers in the room here. Now, The fourth piece that is critical, and I'll talk about that later in this section, in this presentation today, is how agility has become an important aspect of this journey. The most important aspect about agility is the philosophy to fail fast. Not necessarily get everything right. Be willing to fail, but with a very simple principle that I would rather that I attempt, I try. If I succeed, I succeed. If I don't, at least I fail. But I fail soon enough that I could get up, rub off, and start with the next initiative. So the concept of being able to do things faster in smaller sprints in what would be called as agile manner is, let's say, a very intrinsic aspect about the digital banking culture. And that's one of the tenets of what you see there. FinTech innovation, I think this is like a, it's more like a oxymoron. I mean, not rather oxymoron. It's more like a, should I say, a redundant statement. If it is FinTech, it has to be innovation. And if it is innovation, it has to be FinTech. But you clearly see that a lot of innovation you're doing today is being driven with collaboration with FinTechs. And that's obviously the aspect we saw earlier about FinTech collaboration. And the last piece is straight-through integration. Now, the important piece here is if you're a digital bank and if you're having customers onboarded digitally, but if there is actually paper drop happening behind the wall and then people are getting to do things manually, then that is not digital, right? Clearly, making sure that the whole value chain that the customer experiences right from the first point he or she is onboarded, to the point the service is delivered to the extreme end is actually all where the journey is, and that's straight through. Now, that's the first aspect of the six areas we were to talk. The second is actually banking as a service. We already talked about it. I'll just give another color to this. When you're dealing with banking as a service, what kind of partners do you deal with? You deal with partners who are just providing those services, your services, to third parties. The partner could actually be providing it also as an aggregator. So he's picking a service from Bank A, another service from Bank B, and putting it together. That's an aggregator. The partner could actually be a distributor alone, or a distributor and an aggregator, right? So the partner may have his or her own services to offer and actually building your service on top of it. So these are variants of what you see is banking as a service. Open banking and finance. Now here is where it gets really fascinating and interesting. In fact, panel number 2 today will be talking about a lot about digital lending and wealth. And you see that what you're seeing in open banking and finance is actually about where you could see partnerships actually driving, payment initiation, account informations, personal finance, wealth management, and cross-border payments, especially wherever you are seeing the ability to have portability of the customer from one bank to another, which is driven by the FinTech partnership. You're seeing open banking evolve there very, very fast and very well accepted. Yeah, this is pretty after PSD2 and what we've experienced also in the European markets. You see this to be taking off very well. It comes with its own, flip side as well, which is a lot to do with the risk associated and what we see as the data protection and whatnot. But in one of these panels, we're going to have a little longer chat about that as well. Identity verification is a very common open banking use case that you see, especially in India, right? I mean, if you had to go through all the KYC in onboarding and you've gone through the whole journey with Bank A, why should you go do that, to the second bank, right? I mean, why can't that bank actually say that I've done this with this customer and you may actually be good enough to take? So that's really where the reusability of the verification process becomes, and that's an example of an open banking use case here. Now, the piece, I mean, this is now let's say the meat of today's summit, which is AI in banking. We're talking about artificial intelligence and what we're seeing as the evolution of that in real-life use cases. So what you're seeing here are some examples of what people have done. This is by no means exhaustive, but this is to give a sense about the variety, both in terms of the breadth and the quality or the depth of what people have been doing using AI, right? I mean, here we have some interesting use cases. I'm pleased to know that many of these names here are happening to be with people who actually have implemented it or been part of the team here. So we have DBS, we have HSBC, we have in fact quite a few people here in the room. Generative AI, which is obviously Gen AI as it is called, which is quite popular. particularly in real-time chatbots and real-time, assistants. That's clearly an area that you see as a most common use case that one sees of AI. People talk about AI, they talk about chatbots, right? But I guess, there is a long journey there. Fraud prevention clearly is, if you ask me what takes the cake in terms of impact that AI could actually bring into the banking and the financial services industry, I would definitely think fraud prevention is a very critical area where you see impact. Predictive analytics is, let's say, the other side where could be predictive analytics on anything, and it sits on top of volumes of data that it actually processes. Personalizing customer data and recommending products, which is actually an extension of the prediction that you saw in the analytics. Helping drive a lot of automation, process automation, intelligent automation. We actually have people in the room here who actually specialize in this space, which is clearly about automation and what happens there. And cognitive RPA, which as the name calls out, it is not just process automation, but actually having cognitive ability to drive that, right? So that's clearly what you see on AI in banking. Now, one could talk for hours together on this area, right? We take a lot of pride as IBS, Cedar and IBS Intelligence, and actually maybe party to this ecosystem facilitation where you drive a lot of banks and fintechs to collaborate, right? And this collaboration, you could see, has taken various shapes, right? You could see that it has taken shape. And these are examples where one was about, partnership with driving payments. Emirates NBD actually got a partnership with Hub71 to drive high net worth individuals to actually be making investments. This is a fascinating partnership there. IndusInd in India actually got to drive inward remittance with NRIs, to actually be done through a fintech partnership. Lloyds actually was an example for dynamic currency conversion. That's the UK example there. Saxo and MasterCard partner to drive open banking payments and seamless money transfer into investment accounts. That's another European example. So you find, and these are, one could, Nikhil, who heads the digital assets and research, he could give you hundreds of use cases where we actually have been profiling, analyzing. In fact, there are submissions coming as innovation use cases, which actually sometimes takes your breath away, right? In terms of how these partnerships have really made a benefit, to the bank's customers ultimately, right? Not just the banks. And the last piece is I'll talk briefly about what does it take to actually build a bank of the future. Many of you may relate to what is on the left-hand side, which is how banking has been. And what you're seeing on the right is how banking will be, right? Many of us already are as part of the journey, but it's important to kind of re-emphasize it. From having a silo organized structure to actually what could be a highly collaborative model, which is extremely critical. And there are people in the room who have been clients where we actually, when we drive some of the large transformation programs, the first thing that one tries to do is to actually create what could actually be units together to make sure that it is not silo. Moving from being project-centric to becoming customer-centric. As I said, the long gestation from idea to code actually becoming what could actually be fast-track, fast iterative approach. Moving into automation, clearly having a focus on driving automation as a mindset. Making sure that there is the granularization of processes and technology. This is very important, right? Where you're not necessarily having everything tightly coupled, but giving the breathing space to actually get everything done separately. Making technology open source and modern, driving ownership and accountability, and obviously the last piece is on making it lean and fast track, right? I think that pretty much is what I wanted to present. I do have a panel discussion starting in 2 minutes, but if there's any question from anyone, I could take one. Well, if there is none, then I have to concede that the chef is still ahead of us. So we'll need to try hard, my panelists.